Vladimir Putin, one of the most prominent and enigmatic figures of the 21st century. His name is synonymous with power, control, and political intrigue. From his rise in the KGB to his reign as the president of Russia, Putin's journey is a story of ambition, pragmatism, and a deep understanding of the geopolitical game. For nearly a quarter of a century, Putin has shaped Russia's destiny, his leadership leaving an indelible mark on the nation and the world. But who is Vladimir Putin, really? How did he rise to become the most powerful man in Russia? And what is the legacy of his rule? In this documentary, we'll explore the man behind the power, his early years, his rise through the KGB, his ascension to the presidency, and the methods he used to consolidate power. We'll look at his foreign policy strategies, the controversies that have defined his leadership, and how Russia under Putin has evolved into a nation both feared and admired on the world stage. We'll also analyze his role in shaping modern Russia and his place in the global order. Join us as we take an in-depth look at the life of Vladimir Putin, Russia's strongman, and uncover the secrets behind his meteoric rise and unyielding grip on power. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on October 7, 1952, in Leningrad, a city scarred by the siege of Leningrad during World War II. His parents, Maria and Vladimir Putin, lived through extreme hardship. His father had served in the Soviet Navy during the war, while his mother struggled to keep the family together in the aftermath of the conflict. The young Putin's childhood was far from easy. His family lived in cramped conditions, and like many children of the post-war generation, Putin grew up amidst scarcity and trauma. However, it was during these early years that he developed a sense of resilience and a deep understanding of survival in difficult conditions. As a boy, Putin was fascinated by martial arts, particularly judo and sambo. These disciplines were not just sports for him but life lessons, teaching him the value of discipline, control, and mental toughness. These traits would stay with him throughout his career and would become emblematic of his leadership style. Putin's early ambition also led him to pursue a career in law. In 1975, he graduated from Leningrad State University, where he wrote a thesis on international law. However, rather than entering a legal profession, Putin's ambitions took a more clandestine path. In 1975, he joined the KGB, the Soviet Union's most powerful and feared intelligence agency. The KGB represented the epitome of Soviet power, an institution that controlled information, quashed dissent, and protected the communist regime. Putin's time in the KGB would be formative. He was stationed in East Germany, working undercover as an intelligence officer. This period in the heart of Cold War Europe exposed him to a world of espionage, covert operations, and the geopolitical maneuvering that would define much of his later career. Putin, an ambitious and disciplined officer, quickly rose through the ranks of the KGB, learning not only the art of intelligence but also the importance of loyalty, secrecy, and control. Putin's time in East Germany came to an abrupt end with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The collapse of the Eastern Bloc and the subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 marked a turning point in his life. The KGB, once a symbol of Soviet strength, was no longer the same institution, and Putin, facing a shifting world, returned to Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, in 1991. The collapse of the USSR had created a power vacuum, and Putin was determined to navigate this chaotic political landscape. In the 1990s, Russia was in a state of turmoil. The end of the Soviet Union led to an economic collapse, hyperinflation, and widespread poverty. The oligarchs, a small group of wealthy businessmen, began to seize control of Russia's major industries, and political instability reigned. The country was desperate for leadership, and Vladimir Putin, now a former KGB officer with a law degree and experience in the corridors of power, was looking for a way to climb the political ladder. In 1991, Putin was appointed as an advisor to Anatoly Sobchak, the liberal mayor of St. Petersburg. This position allowed him to interact with the city's elite and become involved in the region's economic and political decisions. It was in these early years that Putin honed his political skills, learning how to navigate the post-Soviet landscape and building relationships with key figures in the Russian political and business world. As Sobchak's deputy mayor, Putin was tasked with overseeing St. Petersburg's foreign relations and economic policy. During this time, Putin's relationships with influential businessmen began to take shape, setting the stage for his future ascent to power. But despite his rising political fortunes, Putin remained relatively unknown to the public. His focus was on quietly building alliances and consolidating influence. In 1996, Sobchak lost the mayoral election, and Putin moved to Moscow. There, he entered the service of the Russian Federation's central government, joining President Boris Yeltsin's administration. Putin's first major role was in the Federal Security Service, FSB, the successor agency to the KGB. He quickly rose through the ranks, becoming the head of the FSB in 1998. By the end of the 1990s, Yeltsin's leadership was faltering. His health was deteriorating, and his approval ratings were at an all-time low. Yeltsin needed a successor who could restore order to the country and strengthen his legacy. In 1999, Putin was appointed Prime Minister of Russia, a position that few believed would lead to anything significant. But Putin had a different plan. In a bold move that surprised many, Yeltsin appointed Putin as acting president on December 31, 1999, as he abruptly resigned. This move set the stage for Putin's meteoric rise to power. Putin was initially seen as a placeholder, a temporary leader until Yeltsin's successor could be chosen. But within months, Putin's popularity surged, largely due to his firm stance in the Second Chechen War, where he promised to restore order and crush the separatists in Chechnya. Putin's rise was swift and strategic. Upon assuming the presidency in 2000, his first goal was to consolidate his power and restore stability to a country fractured by the chaos of the 1990s. He moved quickly to centralize control over Russia's regions and dismantle the oligarchs' influence, many of whom had become far too powerful under Yeltsin. Putin's administration set out to limit the power of regional leaders and reform the country's federal structure. The introduction of federal districts in 2000 gave the Kremlin greater control over regional governors, effectively reducing their autonomy. This move was a clear indication that Putin was determined to centralize authority and eliminate any threats to his leadership. At the same time, Putin took aim at the oligarchs, the powerful businessmen who had gained enormous wealth and influence during the privatization of Russia's state assets. One of the most notable examples of Putin's crackdown came in 2003, with the arrest of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, the head of the Yukos Oil Company. Khodorkovsky's arrest and subsequent conviction on charges of tax evasion and fraud sent a powerful message. No one, not even Russia's richest men, was above Putin's control. While the arrest of Khodorkovsky was a clear example of Putin's resolve to eliminate opposition, it also highlighted his growing authoritarian tendencies. As the years went by, Putin's grip on power tightened, and his government became increasingly centralized and controlled. Independent media outlets were silenced or co-opted, and political opposition faced increasing repression. Putin's approval ratings remained high, but the country's political environment became more restrictive. Putin's economic policies also played a key role in solidifying his popularity. Under his leadership, Russia's economy experienced substantial growth, fueled largely by rising oil and gas prices. The Russian middle class expanded, and the country's standard of living improved, leading many to see Putin as the one who had pulled Russia out of its post-Soviet decline. Putin's leadership was not limited to Russia's borders. From the beginning of his presidency, he sought to reassert Russia's place on the global stage. He believed that Russia had been humiliated during the 1990s and needed to restore its power and influence. Putin's foreign policy was focused on challenging the West and re-establishing Russia as a superpower. One of the key moments in Putin's foreign policy came in 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia in response to separatist movements in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The West condemned Russia's actions, but Putin's decision was a bold statement. Russia would no longer tolerate NATO's expansion into former Soviet territories. Perhaps the most significant moment in Putin's foreign policy came in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea. The move was a direct challenge to the West and a sign of Russia's renewed assertiveness. The annexation, following a disputed referendum, was widely condemned by the international community, and sanctions were imposed on Russia. However, within Russia, Putin's approval ratings soared, with many viewing the annexation as a triumph for Russian nationalism. In addition to Crimea, Putin's government has been involved in various other conflicts and interventions. In Syria, Russia has supported the regime of Bashar al-Assad, using military force to prop up the government against rebel forces. The Russian military presence in Syria has expanded, and Russia has taken on a more prominent role in Middle Eastern geopolitics. Vladimir Putin's leadership has been marked by numerous controversies. His regime has been accused of suppressing political opposition, curbing civil liberties, and controlling the media. Independent journalists and activists have been targeted, and some have paid the ultimate price for speaking out against Putin's government. Perhaps the most notable case is that of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who has been a vocal critic of Putin for years. In 2020, Navalny was poisoned with a nerve agent, an attack widely attributed to the Russian state. Navalny survived the poisoning but was later arrested upon his return to Russia. The Russian opposition, led by figures like Navalny, has faced an uphill battle against a government that controls nearly every aspect of the political system. Despite this, the opposition has continued to challenge Putin, though their efforts have often been met with repression. Putin's government has also been linked to widespread corruption. High-ranking officials, including members of his inner circle, have been accused of using their positions for personal gain. The wealth accumulated by Putin and his associates has raised questions about the true nature of his leadership. As of 2025, Vladimir Putin remains at the helm of Russia. His reign has transformed Russia into a more powerful, albeit more authoritarian, state. Under his leadership, Russia has reclaimed its role as a global player, asserting itself on the world stage in ways not seen since the Soviet Union's collapse. But Putin's legacy is a complicated one. While he is credited with restoring Russia's pride, stabilizing its economy, and reasserting its influence, his rule has also been marked by repression, corruption, and a disregard for democratic norms. As Putin approaches the end of his political career, the question remains, will history remember him as the leader who saved Russia, or as a ruler who undermined the very principles of freedom and democracy? Vladimir Putin's story is far from over. Only time will tell how his legacy will be judged by the Russian people and the world. But one thing is certain, his influence on Russia, and on the global stage, will be felt for generations to come.